This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for watching this week's NC Spin. We begin by reviewing the State of the State address delivered by Governor Cooper Monday night, followed by the response from Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger. As expected, there were big differences, and we asked our panel to help sort them out for you. Also, we've talked for years about the need to change the way we draw congressional and legislative districts, and several proposals before the legislature right now give optimism that this might happen this year. And of course, we'll ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Speaking of the panel, this week's panel includes Linda Coleman, whom we welcome back, former legislator and former candidate for Congress, John Hood, syndicated columnist and author, Chris Fitzsimon from the Newsroom, and Leo Daughtry, former legislator. We begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages from our underwriters.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
North Carolinians pay for health insurance for people in 37 other states, yet 300,000 of our citizens have no affordable health insurance options. Let's find a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured. Visit careforcarolina.com.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Let's get to it. As is customary, Governor Cooper appeared before a joint session of the legislature and presented his State of the State address, followed by Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger's Republican response. Governor Cooper repeatedly used the word determined in things he wanted to accomplish this year. We're equally determined to ask our panel to discuss both messages. I want to ask all of you, give us your evaluation of Cooper's State of the State address. Tell us what you liked and what you think could have been perhaps changed. Leo Daughtry, I'll start with you.
One thing I liked was the fact that it only lasted 40 minutes. Most of them last an hour and a half, and if you sit there, your eyes sort of glaze over after a while when you hear the same thing over and over. He was not talking to the members of the General Assembly. He was talking to his base. He was trying to encourage the members of his party to make sure that they were on board with what he had planned. I would give him I think he covered all his bases. I think he was very smart in bringing the three people out that he did. And so I would give him a B-.
All right, Chris?
Well, if we're going to give him grades, I think I'd give him a B+ or an A-. I thought it was a solid speech, sort of what you expect for Roy Cooper. There were no secrets in his agenda. I think if you look at this in a broader context, this is sort of middle of the road, traditional Democratic appeal to issues: education, workforce preparedness, the environment. He talked about Medicaid expansion, which people, I guess, are going to say was the liberal thing in there, although a lot of Republican governors, including Mike Pence, when he was governor of Indiana, expanded Medicaid. So I thought this was a refreshing, non-actually partisan speech. And we'll talk about Berger's reaction in a minute. Cooper didn't use the word Democrat or Republican, I don't believe, in the entire 40 minutes.
John Hood, give us your grade and tell us what you thought of it was good about the speech and how you analyzed it.
I think it was about an average speech, about a C. This is not Roy Cooper's strength. I suspect he would want to admit that there are other politicians that give these sort of set piece in front of an audience speeches in a more glamorous way or a more rhetorically impressive way. But it was a well-crafted speech. It had his main themes. I think one of the defects is actually what Chris was probably thinking was an asset, which is I think he should have talked some more about the partisan divide and that we're going to disagree on some things, but maybe we can agree on these other things. I think it would have been wise, given a generally Democratic cycle in 2018 where Democrats gained seats, for him to take that opportunity to try to argue. I know we're going to disagree about these things, but surely these other, I think he should have been more explicit about that. That would have been better for him.
Linda, you've sat through these before. What did you think of Cooper's speech?
Well, first of all, I would give it an A-. I thought that it was hopeful. It was upbeat. He reviewed a lot of the issues that have plagued North Carolina for quite a while, the rural and urban divide, education, the environment, all of those issues. The one thing that I don't think got driven home the way that it could have been was the fact that he could have made a stronger point of how bipartisanship could work together, how we come together in times of storms to bring about solutions and make North Carolina better. And I think that's the point that he was trying to make.
To it, but I agree with you. He probably didn't nail it quite as hard. Leo, you've sat through probably more of these doggone State of the State speeches than most people would in a lifetime. The governor seemed to hit on the talking points that he's been doing going around the state: the Medicaid expansion, greenhouse emission reductions, broadband internet expansion, hurricane recovery. Anything new that came out of this that you weren't expecting or thought was new?
Well, the things he didn't say, he talked about climate change a great deal, which is the environment, but he didn't talk about hog lagoons, which is in the news almost every day, and the courts are having to deal with that. And I think it could have been one of his topics to say we ought to deal with this issue, to take the responsibility for it, which is our responsibility. The second thing he didn't talk about was incentives. We lost three businesses that was in the paper a lot: Apple, Amazon, and Toyota. And we're always coming in second in these really big buffalo hunts, and he could have talked about that. And thirdly, he should have mentioned what Dale Falwell, our treasurer, is talking about, which is the health care plan for the employees. I think that is in big trouble.
Interesting. Linda, so far as it goes, let's talk about the optics for the evening. There were a lot of standing ovations. If you noticed, one side of the chamber was sitting on its thumbs and the other side was getting up fairly frequently. The female members, particularly Democratic female members, were dressed in white. A lot of people being introduced in the gallery. Is that theatrics? Is it sort of still working, or is this getting kind of tired?
Well, I think that it's still working. You see that at the federal level, and you see it because the women in Congress wore white, and it's a sign of solidarity. Yeah. You look at your base, and you look at the people that you are talking to, and they want to support that. So yes, you're going to have those standing ovations. You're going to have people who really want to show that we're behind you 100%, and we want to get this done too. So I think that the optics are good because people hear words, but they see, and they get a better feel for what they see more than what they hear sometimes.
John spent a lot of time on education, and I thought it made some interesting points there. He said it was now the citizens of the state trust them, the legislature, to fund the education. Now it's time to put the money where the trust is. From that standpoint. But he talked about the school bond referendum and mentioned the fact that there are $8 billion in school construction needs. Seems to me like he came out favoring Speaker Moore's position so far as having a public vote versus the Senate's position, which is just funding it, self-funding it. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yes. He has specifically endorsed doing a school bond rather than a pay-as-you-go system. So it is, in this case, the Cooper administration and the House leadership arguing with the Senate leadership, who contends that a pay-as-you-go strategy over time will not have all the debt service costs.
Who's going to win that argument?
I don't think that the House and the governor will get at least the full amount of bond that they want, given the other challenges that our budget has in the short and long run.
Speaker Moore wanted $2 billion, or $1.9 million. One of the things he mentioned, which he's talked about quite a bit, which he says that 95% of the houses without internet, broadband internet, or in rural North Carolina, and it was time for us to expand it, which is a message I'm sure Senator Harry Bound enjoyed. But how's that going to play?
I think that'll play well, especially among the House leaders. I think there's a growing consensus we have to do something. There might not be a consensus in what that is, but I thought that's actually a very a popular approach. I thought most of the things that the governor talks about actually have popular support. The Senate leadership might not like it all, and the House leadership doesn't like some of it, but I actually think most of the themes that he hit, again, you could argue about the implementation, but I think most of the things in that speech and in his platform are widely supported.
Let's move over to Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger's rebuttal to this. Now, obviously, it had to be recorded in advance, and he had absolutely no way of knowing all of the things and all of the comments that the governor was going to make. But we talked about this issue so far as working together and so forth like that. Senator Berger mentioned the fact that we ought to work together, but then it seemed to me like his speech became very, very partisan. Would you agree, Linda?
Oh, absolutely, because he said that the agenda that he had set was working very well, and he saw no reason to deviate from that. So that did not open the door for bipartisanship, working together on the issues that Governor Cooper was explaining.
But Leo, really, he did sit down and cite facts. Here's what's happened during the years since 2011 when the Republicans have taken over, and it was very statistically easy for me to say, based. Your reaction to that?
I think he's exactly right. He's raised the teacher salaries, I think, 5 years in a row. They're talking about raising it again. They're going at a measured rate. He talked about reasonable taxation, and he spent a lot of time talking about the court ruling regarding the two things, which were
tax cap and
the
which
voter
just
registration. Yeah, so that was part of his speech. I think his was measured. I think he tried to reach his base, and I think he was successful.
Well, it goes back to the point I think one of you made that in both instances they were speaking to their base. One of the things that Berger talked about was that there was a cloud on the horizon. All of the picture he was painting was very positive in the main, but he said there was a cloud on the horizon, and it's unrestrained judiciary. Yep. Well, they have tinkered with trying to do something about that, not successfully.
Right, they've fumbled in many ways. The governor just recently signed a bill to restore the Court of Appeals to its original 15 seats after the legislature had tried to reduce the size of that court. Look, I thought some of Senator Berger's speech was way off base. He mentioned the term abortion on demand, which was, I don't know where he got that from. He was talking about the Green New Deal, which Governor Cooper didn't talk about. He did talk about climate change, and as John was saying, he thought Cooper made a mistake. I thought Berger made a mistake. The people sitting at home don't really care who improves their schools or who protects the water or who funds better teachers in the classroom. What they fund is that it's being done. Cooper went out of his way not to talk about that, and Berger sort of wrote a Republican attack speech. The equivalent would be literally if Cooper had talked about Donald Trump and all the terrible things he's doing, we would be outraged. In some ways, Berger gave a speech against the National Democratic Party.
Yeah, of course, you're assuming that many people watched it. I don't know, but there were an awful lot of over-the-air TV network stations that weren't even carrying the thing live. Thank goodness UNC TV did. He says that the legislature is going to continue their policy of low taxation and low spending. Sounded to me kind of like a challenge to the governor, because the governor was talking about expanding programs and spending.
I mean, let's be clear about this. Politicians often give meaningless, blathery, misty comparisons or allusions to bipartisanship, pretend that partisan differences don't exist. And what they actually mean, bipartisanship is when you concede to me. That's what it means. And that's the implication. That's what I meant about Governor Cooper. That's what Governor Cooper's speech sounds like. There aren't any partisan differences. We all agree on my agenda. And that's not the beginning of bipartisanship. Actually, Phil Berger's speech was a better entry to real partisan negotiation, because he's saying there are partisan differences. You want to do this, we want to do that. We're not going to agree on some of these big issues, but there are some other things we can agree on.
Somebody being for abortion on demand, that's a really bipartisan appeal.
Abortion on demand is a reasonable description of the policies we currently have.
That is not true.
Really?
Who talked about that? What bill in the legislature this year is talking about that? Did Governor Cooper mention that?
There is no need for a bill. The point they're making is there are no meaningful restrictions on abortion today. That means it's abortion on demand.
Cooper gave a statesman speech, and Berger gave his base red meat.
All right, so
one thing Cooper did say was, we're all in favor of better teachers and better principals. Well, I'm glad he said that because we all agree on that. The question is, how do you get there?
Yeah. And I think there's no question about it. You two guys have been in the chambers. You have worked in the legislature. What do these two speeches, if anything, say about what kind of legislative session we might expect this year, Linda?
I think we're going to see more of the same, unfortunately, because the two groups just refuse to sit down and figure out how we're going to get to the things that we both believe in.
They pay lip
better
service
education,
to it, but
lip service.
It would have been interesting if Tim Moore had given the response and talked about the school bond.
Yeah, well, interesting. What do you think this says about the legislative session?
Well, I think there are going to be some opportunities for them to sit down together for the school bond. You know, there's one argument that says that one legislative session can't bind the next one. Well, if you got a school bond, then you're satisfied that that's going to take place on down the road. So I think there'll be some discussions about that and other things that are not so political. I know back in the days when Beverly Perdue was governor, there was about 7 or 8 Democrats who would come over and they would say, we can live with this. And
can you do this?
And that's right. And we finally got a
compromise.
Budget. Yeah.
As far as it goes. What do you think it says about the legislative session?
I think that there are areas where they are going to cooperate. It is unlikely to be, you know, again, if this stated assumption is cooperation happens when the Senate concedes, okay, that is the beginning of nothing. That will lead nowhere. Okay, well, what we ought to have been talking about is the school bond, where the Senate is on the wrong side.
The Senate hadn't been doing a lot of conceding in recent years.
Right, so the Senate is supposed to concede is not the beginning of a conversation that leads anywhere useful. What they need to be talking about is they know no side is going to get exactly what they want. They have to make a deal. To get to the deal, you have to first talk about your differences in explicit ways.
Does Governor Cooper's ability to be able to veto make a big difference in the way this session is going to turn out?
It makes a huge difference. It's one of the defining issues of this session. If the Democrats stick together, this will be a far different session. He'll get more of what he wants, just by definition.
Let's change gears here. We've seen lawsuit after lawsuit on gerrymandering in our state, while the courts have struck down both congressional and legislative districts. And as we speak, we have a couple of gerrymandering suits still awaiting ruling, one at the U.S. Supreme Court, one in the state court. Whichever political party is not in power has screamed for the need for impartial redistricting. The party in power obviously doesn't want to relinquish that power to draw the districts. And so since 2011, Republicans have been in charge and followed the tradition, but some of the Republican Party now seem to be softening their positions, their opposition just a little bit. Linda Coleman, some suggest we might see some action on redistricting in this session because they say Republicans are worried they might lose one house or another in the 2020 election. Why is that significant?
It's so significant because 2020, the beginning of the decade, is always the prize because whoever is in charge gets to draw the lines. North Carolina, by population, is supposed to be a purple state, but based on the districts, both legislatively and congressional, they are red states. And the other significance of that at the congressional level is North Carolina's population has continued to increase, so much so that it's very possible that we will get a 14th congressional district.
So they're going to have to redraw all of the districts in order to be able to accommodate that. Leo, you're our lawyer. The Constitution says the legislature has the authority to revise the congressional and legislative maps. Doesn't say, however, they have to be the ones who draw them. Rick Henderson, who is a panelist on our show, says our legislators need to be rule makers, not map makers. Have the Republican leadership finally gotten religion and gotten tired of all the court battles and scared of judges drawing districts?
Well, I think since I've been around, we've been in court with legislative redistricting and cases. I think North Carolina's had led the nation in the lawsuits regarding redistricting for so long.
We're number one.
I think we're number one in that. And the computer is so sophisticated now that they can encapsulate another crowd, and you can draw a district as quickly as you want to and easily with the computer. I think probably the time has come.
So should it, Chris, be a constitutional amendment that requires this, or should it just be legislation?
I think there's two things at play in this legislative session. One is Senator Berger has said not kind things about the effort to have some independent process. So again, we go back to, will the Senate agree to reform at all? That's number one. And number two, what will the reform be? Which is very important. I don't think it's decided yet. There are competing bills. There's probably be another bill introduced for a Citizens Commission. There's issues about transparency. There's issues about the criteria. There's issues about should we write this in the Constitution. There's issues about what should we write in the Constitution. The Democrats are split on that. There's some Republicans asking a lot of questions privately. I'm hopeful that because we're arguing at least in one chamber about what kind of reform to have, that we'll have reform. That's one battle, but the Senate's going to have to realize that we have to change it. By the way, the other day marked the 10th anniversary of the last time Senator Berger introduced an independent commission bill in 2009 as a minority leader.
Right. The shoe's on the other foot now. Chris talked about the big issues. The big issue, really, John, when it comes down to it, is who's going to draw the maps, right?
Nope.
You don't think so?
That is not the most important issue. The most important issue is what the rules are. The second most important issue is who draws the maps. They're both important, but the rules are more important.
All right.
And putting those rules in the Constitution in specificity is absolutely essential. Now, you don't necessarily have to put the mechanism for drawing the map in the Constitution. We can make an argument for that, but what you absolutely have to do is put the criteria in, and then either you could argue for a staff-driven system like in Iowa or a commission system. I like the staff-driven system better, and there's two competing bills, as Chris said, about that. But if you get the rules right,
staff.
Correct. Okay. But if you get the rules right, then it reduces the degrees of freedom for anybody, whether it's lawmakers, a commission, a staff member. You want to reduce their discretion by having very specific rules in the Constitution. I think that's the answer, and I'm cautiously optimistic it will pass.
But Leo, one of the things about this is regardless of the two bills that are being considered right now, the legislature still has the ability to approve or maybe even tweak any districts that get submitted anything. Are we really doing anything then? It can't be just an up or down vote.
None of the bills allow that, Tom.
It has to be up or down. Right?
Yeah, you can only amend for purely corrective reasons, like misspelled words.
I misunderstood then.
So
I
you
thought
cannot,
they still had the ability to tweak
that has been going around, Tom, the last several days is incorrect. Neither bill that has currently been filed allows the legislature to draw maps or to amend the maps the way they might want.
All right. So what should be the criteria for drawing maps, Linda? What do you think that ought to be? You know, the Constitution says they should be compact and contiguous, whole county and so forth like that. Any other criteria you can think of?
Well, and I certainly think that it should allow for the representation of the people, whether it's racially or partisanship. It should include those.
We got to abide by Voting Rights Acts and so forth like that. It'll be interesting to see how this turns out. Virginia's considering the same thing right this minute, as a matter of fact. They're still going to be. So, very quickly, I got just a few seconds. Should we be optimistic or pessimistic, Leo?
Optimistic.
John? Optimistic.
Chris?
I'm about 50-50.
I'm
worried we're going to, and we should, I'm worried we're going to have a big fight about what those criteria are and should they be in the Constitution or not. There's a big divide about that.
Okay. Linda, optimistic or pessimistic?
I'm optimistic because there's so many court cases going on, and I think that we want to stay out of the limelight of the courts.
Well, we do. I'm not sure whether the folks that are making the decisions on this. Well, now it's time for us to turn to the part of the show that everybody enjoys every week, when we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Chris Fitzsimon, tell us something we don't know.
Well, one of the big mysteries in Raleigh these days is when is Governor Cooper going to appoint a justice to the Supreme Court to take the place of Justice Beasley, who moved over to be Chief Justice. The bill recently signed that would make the Court of Appeals go back to 15 may answer that question. I think we'll see that soon. One of the leading candidates is a current judge on the Court of Appeals.
Leo Daughtry, tell us something we don't know.
In 2006, there was an actual innocence committee set up, the study committee set up, and because of the hard work of I. Beverly Lake and Chris Muma, 14 innocent people are now out of prison.
Linda Coleman, tell us something we don't know.
Well, there's a huge skills gap that everybody knows about, but there are 9,000 IT jobs in the Research Triangle Park area that are unfilled.
Interesting. John Hood.
We've had a lot of news distracting us, but the document dump about Governor Cooper and his involvement in the Atlantic Coast Pipeline has been increasingly developed by reporters looking at what they found. It is undeniable at this point that Governor Cooper attempted, he got concessions from Duke in order to get a permit, to give a permit. That was a mistake. It wasn't a Watergate level scandal, but there is really no credible defense of the governor's position at this point.
I've got one this week. Last week, 21 people died in North Carolina as a result of the flu. We've had over 100 so far this year, and the worst months for the flu, February and March, are ahead of us. We're getting all the numbers from them. A vaccination could have prevented it. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter. Give your feedback and read my weekly column. Be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
North Carolinians pay for health insurance for people in 37 other states, yet 300,000 of our citizens have no affordable health insurance options. Let's find a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured. Visit careforcarolina.com.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.